Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of CPAC Live. Today, we are looking at our country and we're looking at the world, and most of us are scratching our heads. We're going to be joined today by Charlie Kirk, a great organizer and leader of Turning Point, who has a great new book, The MAGA Doctrine. We're also going to be talking to our good friend Nigel Farage, so we can try to compare notes on what's happening here and what's happening in the UK. And is it all part of a plot to undermine freedom-loving societies and most things that we hold dear within the context of the very serious question about equal treatment of the law and racial harmony? But first, without further ado, my friend Charlie Kirk. Charlie, how are you?
I'm doing great, Matt. You're an American hero. Glad to be here.
You are too. Now, you look tan, you look rested, you look like, what did you say? You said your hairstyle is going to soon be in the form of William Wallace's. Is that
That's right. Exactly. I'm doing the William Wallace thing. I'm not going to cut my hair till they give us our freedom back.
If you get drawn and quartered, just so you know, I'm going to come out there and fight, okay?
Well, the problem with that comparison, Matt, is it didn't quite end well for him.
Did not.
But it ended great for the cause.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly right. Well, let's get right into this. First of all, tell folks where you are. You're in Arizona?
That's correct. And we're reopening slowly but surely. And so it's still a moderately freedom-loving state. So
we're in the Mercy and I and the ACU. We all live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where the governor is intent on keeping us comfortable. And we're not very comfortable because we're ready to get back. We're ready to get back in action. And we've already gone back in action at the ACU, and my family's out and about. But I'm surprised how many people really got spooked by all this.
Yeah, and so Matt, it's a really interesting period in American history, and it's also super disappointing. I mean, now you're seeing public health officials come out, over, I think it was 1,500 of them, say it's okay to go protest because the thing you're protesting is actually a bigger threat than the virus. And just think about that. And so we now had to watch footage, Matt, of 6,000, 7,000 people in the streets, not socially distanced, right up against each other, while those of us that are Christians were not able to go to church or mass on the holiest day of the Christian calendar. And so at some point, those of us that are participating in decent and civil society have to ask the question, how far are we willing to be pushed? And now I'm in no way supporting doing what the left does, which is an outrage industry, but we have been so compliant, beyond compliant, as conservatives and as Christians, especially in the last couple of weeks, as we have seen the arsonists burn down entire American cities. And I think we're starting to realize that this is in some part a political agenda to try to make America something that it isn't, to try to radically redefine and restructure our country. And so, yeah, a lot of people are still fearful. I mean, I flew yesterday. I wore the mask until I boarded, and I take the mask off. And then some guy turned around at me and said, "You better put on your expletive mask." And I asked him, I said, I had a very spirited conversation with him. He was wearing a face shield, by the way. It was the mask, the face shield, the whole thing, the gloves. And I said, "You look pretty equipped to not get sick here. Just let me tolerate myself at my own risk." And I realized at that moment that we have allowed fear to dominate the entire American political discourse.
No, you're right. It's fear, and it's also a lack of using our reason. Emotion trumps, logic, and that's a very scary thing.
It really is. And so I call this the entire divide in America is reason versus the left. It's not even right versus left. I mean, Matt, I had to do an entire podcast yesterday on why police are essential. I mean, what are we doing here? I mean, I had to go in for an hour and go back into, well, here's why we have police. Here's why we have the law enforcement. Here's the good they've done. I mean, we are now getting back to the most rudimentary aspects of Western society. And you go to the Black Lives Matter website, blacklivesmatter.com. They have on their website, they want to disassemble the Western prescribed nuclear family. That's on their website.
Yes.
And now corporate America is funding them. We have politicians that are pandering to them. We have Republican senators that are walking with the Black Lives Matter extremists. And I'm really getting the kind of the word sick of it, the phrase sick of it is overused, but if there was any proper application of it, it would probably be right now, because I'm at my end at tolerating these radical elements being platformed
I want
in our
to applaud you
discourse.
for stepping in on this question about what groups believe, because what the media tells us a group is all about, for instance, Black Lives Matter, they tell us that that means that you want to have equal application of the law to whites and blacks and the whole rainbow, which any one of us could sign up for. That's something we all agree with. That's part of like our American heritage, to treat people with equality. But then you have this, you go and do a little research and you realize that they say at Black Lives Matter that everybody associated with them can't do anything to restrict the autonomy of a woman to have full reproductive choice, and that the full range of abortion choices need to be part of the platform. Well, how does that comport with the terrible damage that legalized abortion has done in the Black community and other minority communities? My gosh, in the white community as well. Like this kind of radicalism, does Mitt Romney now want to sign up for the Planned Parenthood agenda? Because that's what he's doing when he signs up for these activities.
Well, look, and I've made it very clear, if Black Lives Matter to Black Lives Matter, they would be protesting outside of abortion clinics. And so let's just take the Minnesota example let's pretend there weren't other elements around this. Let's just pretend this was all about the wrongful killing of George Floyd. And every time I talk about this,
believe that every guest we've had on the show has called that murder, inappropriate, yes, unjust,
Well, and that's the important point, is that people are saying, well, we're divided. I don't know who's divided over this killing. I haven't met that human being. Can you find that person for me? Because I guarantee you, if they existed, they'd be on CNN nonstop. It was murder. It was awful policing. And it was an isolated incident. You can't indict all of law enforcement. But let's pretend that's what they were really upset about. Why are they not protesting Amy Klobuchar? Amy Klobuchar was the individual that decided not to continue to press charges against Derek Chauvin, the person who killed George Floyd. So it's not about that at all. Instead, they are now making this into a macro indictment of Western society and into police in general, into civil America. And so, again, if Black Lives Matter to Black Lives Matter, they would be upset that Patrick Underwood and David Dorn, 2 Black police officers, were killed by radical thugs that was inspired by the arson and the protests in the last couple weeks. And so,
Charlie, your point is dead on. It's correct. And if you look at those folks that run the state of Minnesota, from A to Z, soup to nuts, everything from the governor down to the city council, down to the police chief, to most of the congressional delegation, and certainly the delegation around Minneapolis, St. Paul, these are left-wing Democrats. But yet somehow this injustice, this terrible murder occurs in a state, in a locality, completely run by all their favorite politicians. But that doesn't really work too well with what they're trying to propagandize. So now they have to somehow put Donald Trump somewhere in that, who, in his response to the murder of George Floyd, every one of his comments and his tweets were spot on in their tone and the fact that this should not stand in America. So it's the ultimate act of kind of like the phoniness of our political moment. Just blame Trump for everything.
Yeah, that's well put. And we have to recognize and realize now that they are now trying to indict all of American culture. They're trying to say that America is systemically racist and that we're an awful country. We are systemically unracist, Matt. In fact, I think we're a really decent country, considering how many languages and backgrounds and cultures represented here in America. In fact, if you ask anyone that is honest to you about their interactions, say, how are your interactions generally with people of the other race? Almost everyone you talk to is like, yeah, it's actually pretty good. Right. Whether I'm traveling or I go in a different community, I go to a restaurant and I see we're actually a very decent country. And we have decided to turn our back, we just ignore all of that over the last 20, 30 years and allow one awful example to hijack the entire American political conversation.
Do you know what? That's such a great point, because I have found, and I have not been traveling recently, but in my previous travels, I was always taken aback by how many people of color, how many African Americans, how many recent immigrants who maybe they recognized my association with the conservative movement or the president, and they always had the nicest things to say. They weren't in the loudest of tones, in all candor. Sometimes they were hushed tones, the people who I have the most nasty exchanges with are white socialists. They're the ones who I can't seem to find any affinity with, because I'm like, what are you crazy people thinking, and what are you doing? I really think in many ways the racial boundaries, at least from a political standpoint, have really been coming down as a lot of people gravitated towards a growing economy and these new kind of Trump policies.
Yeah, and look, there's a deeper point here, which is what makes Western society different, Matt, is that we're supposed to be post-racial. And we actually had that going for a couple of years where we were fulfilling Martin Luther King's dream generally of looking at the content of people's character, not the color of your skin. Black Lives Matter wants us to go back into the most awful and divisive tribal lines where they are saying on their website that we must destroy whiteness in America. And look, I first of all, it's so bizarre to say, and it's hard to understand what that exactly means. But I care about what Dr. Carson said. I had him on my podcast. He said, when I'm operating on somebody, I care about their brain. And that's so beautifully put. I care about your soul. I care about your spirit. Skin color is actually so 500 years ago. Like, what are you focused on this for? And that's not to say, Matt, that we should not address specific policies that could lift up certain communities in America, all of which that Black Lives Matter totally oppose. School choice, putting fathers back in the home, rebuilding our inner cities, bringing our jobs back from China. They oppose all of this. Instead, this is really a left-wing, postmodern, Marxist agenda that is trying to penetrate the highest levels of corporate America, suburban America, and civil society as a way to deconstruct our country.
Now, as you said, they pierce the C-suite and the leadership of American corporations and multilateral corporations. Don't you think someone like you, the founder of Turning Point, a cutting edge organization based of young people, a lot of college students and younger, don't you think with what you're doing, with what we're doing at the American Conservative Union and other places, haven't we failed to also permeate the C-suite and the upper echelons of corporations? And isn't it time for a new approach? If they only hear from the left and they don't hear from us, isn't it true that you're going to have this gravitational pull to give to these radical groups because they're kind of like sopping the cries of the mob? And maybe we should try different things.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I've interfaced with some of these companies, and they're afraid to deal with conservatives, and they are more afraid of some sort of boycott industry on the left. And this is a deeper point, Matt, but we're really decent people as conservatives. I mean, we wouldn't ever organize a massive boycott.
You're not really a boycott guy. I'm not really a boycott guy.
I mean, we've done it here and there.
Yeah,
I mean, we've done it here and there, but you know what conservatives are more likely to do? We're more likely to do what we did in 2012, where we go and support industry like Chick-fil-A. And we are generally postured towards a positive type flow of energy, not a negative flow of energy. And so because of that, corporate America, they say, oh, the conservatives will buy our stuff no matter how woke we get. And then they kowtow, Nike, IBM, all these companies that overly capitulate now and are sending 7-figure contributions to an organization that hates our country.
That's bent on the destruction of America and the destruction of capitalism. And I'm not so sure I'm ready to call for a boycott, but I will just tell you, for me and my family, we looked at those lists of companies that are giving money to Black Lives Matter and to the associated nonprofits that they coalesce with. And, no mas. We don't want much to do with those companies. That is not going to make America a better place, a more harmonious place. Charlie Kirk, we love the work you do. We love working with you. CPAC is ready to get back on the road and do events, no matter what these blue state governors and purple state governors say. My guess is you're going to do the same thing.
Yeah, we're getting back on the road really soon. And, we have our political vehicle up and running, our 501c4, which we run Students for Trump through. And I'm going to be doing a campus tour starting in September every week to the election, where I am going to make the clear and convincing case to young people why they should support Donald Trump. I expect no protesters and nothing but agreement. And I'm going to go on college campus after college campus wearing my MAGA hat, telling them why they should reject Joe Biden, the confused, anti-American, communist sympathizing, most corrupt vice president in American history, and why they should embrace Donald Trump. It's going to be awesome.
And how can we buy your book, The MAGA Doctrine?
Well, they can find it anywhere where books are sold, as long as Amazon doesn't kick it off their website. We were Amazon #1 bestseller for 3 days in a row.
Awesome.
So and a New York Times bestseller. So MAGA Doctrine. Anyone wants to check it out, we'd be blessed by that.
Charlie Kirk, thanks for joining us on CPAC Live. We're now going to show you a video of the great Nigel Farage with the crescendo of his leading the effort to pull out of Brussels with the culmination of Brexit. So after this video, we'll be joined by Nigel.
No more being talked down to. No more being bullied. No more Guy Verhofstadt. I mean, what's not to like? I know you're going to miss us. I know you want to ban our national flags, but we're going to wave you goodbye. And we'll look forward in the future to working with you as sovereign.
If you disobey the rules, you get cut off. Could we please remove the flags? Mr. Farage, could we remove the flags, please?
That's it. It's all over. Finished. We've gone.
Could I please ask for quiet? Please sit down, resume your seats, put your flags away, you're leaving, and take them with you if you are leaving now. And goodbye. Can I just say...
Wow, that was an awesome video of the great Nigel Farage, Mr. Brexit, who joins us now. Nigel, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, although I must say, astonished and disturbed by the events in little old England over the last 3 or 4 days.
Well, not everybody, but most of the people watching this show are American citizens. But we are watching a little bit about what's going overseas, including in London, and give people a flavor. It's quite jarring. It's unnerving.
Yeah, so the Black Lives Matter movement, which you in America know all too well, they've been existing in the United Kingdom for a few years, but they've been quite low key. They, in the wake of everything that followed on from George Floyd's death, mobilized in this country, organized a demonstration which took place last Wednesday in London. It finished up after the demo with a couple of hundred people outside Downing Street, the address at which the Prime Minister lives, and we saw violence. We saw punch-ups going on with the police, that kind of thing, very unpleasant scenes. They then announced, and bear in mind, we're in lockdown. There's supposed to be social distancing. And on Saturday, 40,000 of them turned up in Parliament Square, next to the Houses of Parliament. And on Sunday, a similar number turned up outside the US Embassy. So no regard for social distancing whatsoever. The rest of us are living under a strict rule book. I can't even go to my local pub because they've closed it, and yet 40,000 people can meet in central London. And this turned ugly on both days. I mean, can you believe it? By the close on Sunday night, we had, for the second day in a row, had Sir Winston Churchill's statue in Parliament Square vandalized, defaced, with a mob chanting Churchill was a racist. Almost astonishing that this could have happened. I mean, no human individual globally in the 20th century did more to preserve democracy, free speech, and liberty than the very, very gutsy, ballsy Winston Churchill. We then saw at our cenotaph, and the cenotaph is a white stone structure in the middle of Westminster. It's a very modest structure, but it's there to represent the 1.5 million British soldiers who died in 2 world wars. We even saw not just graffiti on it, but someone climbing onto it and setting fire to our Union flag. I mean, these scenes are indescribable. And then, Matt, let me finish.
Go.
In Bristol, which and let's get perspective on this. Bristol has always been a seafaring port facing west, and Bristol was our main slave trading port. You know, these are the histories of our country. We may not like it, but that's how it was 300 years ago. And there was a statue there to a guy who was part of the British African Company, who made a lot of money, and who in later life spent fortunes on building, theatres, town halls, all the rest of it in Bristol. And the mob tore down the statue, stamped on the statue, and then threw it into the dock. I mean, it was what I've said, and I've been criticised for this by some, that it was the birth of the British Taliban, because this is what they do in Syria. They blow up and destroy ancient monuments. So all in all, it's been I have never, I've seen protests, of course. I've seen bits of violence in my life living in and around London, but never have we seen disorder on this scale.
So the idea that a country like America, which started off with what many of us call a birth defect, with black and white not having equal rights, quite honestly, women and men not having equal rights. And over time, we have a democratic process that allows us to fix the Constitution and make groups of people that aren't equal. Yet we can't deny our history. And many times monuments come up as a way to try to heal the country. Instead of saying this never happened, we acknowledge it happened and we move forward with better laws. What you're saying is this type of racial divide and this kind of like desire to cast aside the history of a great country like the United Kingdom, you have similar dynamics. Destroy history.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And remember, it is Black Lives Matter. It is this Marxist anarchist movement that wants to defund the police, abolish the police. I mean, goodness knows, this is Lenin with even more anarchy than Lenin himself could have imagined. I mean, it's pure communism in economic terms. It's very, very dangerous, but it's dressed up as being for equality. It's dressed up as, because of the George Floyd murder, that shows you how terrible police forces are all over the world to black people. Now, look, nobody is defending the actions that took place in Minneapolis. Far from it.
That's right.
Far from it. But that actually isn't the point. The point is, there are bad cops, there are bad politicians, there are bad lawyers, there are bad people in every walk of life who will do bad things. But, in this country, the black-white divide in this country, I think we've had a better healing process here across those difficulties than almost any other country in the world. And yet it is the inspiration of Black Lives Matter, organizations around that. We know who funds them, of course. It's the Soroses, it's the Steyrs. So we have caught, not coronavirus from America, but this particular virus from America.
I will.
And the amazing thing is this, that our mainstream media and our leading politicians, and this I'm sorry to say, includes Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, none of them have the moral courage to stand up and say, now look, we all want a society with equality of opportunity. We all want people to get on according to merit, hard work, and endeavour. We understand the motivation behind the three words, Black Lives Matter, but we cannot defend a Marxist organisation who want to get rid of the police force and who actually have an interest in making division in society even greater and not less. And that moral courage has been lacking in politicians. And can you believe our police officers stood and watched Winston Churchill's statue being defaced and did nothing?
They were probably told to stand down. That's what we're seeing in America. These big city mayors don't want to run afoul of these radicalized groups, and they're telling the police to stand down. As you saw, St. John's Church across from the White House was set afire. And police are standing down. I don't believe the police want to stand down. They're being told to, at least in America.
Yeah, I feel very sorry for our police. We saw men and women on the front line, outside Downing Street, outside Churchill's statue. We saw them without much protective equipment, having to stand there and take it. They were having flares fired at them, bottles thrown at them, bicycles thrown at them. 62 of our London police officers have been injured in these riots, some of them very seriously. And I feel very, very sorry because, you know, the average cop is somebody who wants to do a job for society to make things safer and better for ordinary people. So I feel very sorry for them. No, our senior police have failed. Our senior Conservative politicians at the moment aren't saying a word. Our media, in their own little bubble in London, are convinced that actually, you know, this movement is joyous and justified. I was on with Piers Morgan this morning, who an American audience will remember from his career at CNN. And I said to Piers, I said, you're supporting a Marxist movement that wants to defund the police. Oh, no, he said, you're wrong, Nigel. Well, is it that he doesn't know, or is it that he doesn't want to know?
That's right.
And I've been chasing him on Twitter all day. But it's almost as if a cause, a movement, an organization is presented as being on the side of the angels, and the media do not do their job and drill down and find out what it's all about. I'm all for equality, Matt. I'm all for fairness. I'm all for a better society. I'm all for social advancement. I'm all for all of that. I'm just not for Marxism and anarchy.
The thing that's ironic as an American who's been watching your Twitter, and we have your handle up on the screen, Nigel, but and watching the clips coming out of your country, a country we all feel a close affinity to, why would they go after the statue of Winston Churchill, the personification of anti-fascist? If anybody, he's the one who took it to the fascists. Do they not? Are they so stupid of our history that they don't even know what they're defacing? Or are they doing it because Winston Churchill represents everything they hate, which is the kind of the old historic order of things? What could possibly be the motivation?
Well, it's to do with the British Empire, I think, and their embarrassment about the British Empire. It's to do with the fact that initially Churchill was, although he was a convert, but initially Churchill was reluctant about extending votes to women. But you can't judge what people said and did in 1895 by the values that we have today. You can't do that. Attitudes, social mores change and vary. I mean, all these protesters think they're high and mighty. In a century's time, there'll be people like them that look back on us as barbarians. The world changes, our values move on. But you're absolutely right. The key point, you know, this is the great democratic anti-fascist. This is the guy that took on Adolf Hitler. This is the guy that if he wasn't, had he not existed, there wouldn't be a single black or Jewish person alive in Britain today. A point that seems to have passed them by. But, you know, the education system, Matt, has a lot to do with this.
I agree.
Our universities, and you've got many universities, I know. I've been to American universities. I've seen the professors outside holding up placards, Farage should be banned. I've seen all of this. And, you know, it really is almost as if we have stopped teaching young people critical thinking. And critical thinking is to say, here's an issue, here's a problem, here are two distinct schools of thought as to how you should approach this and deal with this. And you as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old student, you must make your mind up which of these you believe in. That is what classical education and critical thinking is. What we now have in our universities on both sides of the pond, or in too many of them, is people being told, here's a problem, here are two solutions. One is virtuous and good, and if you support the other one, you're basically a Nazi. And that's what's happening to our young people. And it's interesting to see the protests in London. The majority of our protesters are young, white, middle-class kids,
right,
who've been brought up to be ashamed of their country, ashamed of the past, filled with self-loathing. Whereas actually, what they should be told, particularly on the point about slavery, which is the one that's really gripping people at the moment, you know, our past as slave masters, whatever, that actually it was the UK. It was us through William Wilberforce.
That's right.
We were the first free country to abolish slavery and to spread that message across the rest of the Western world. Far from being ashamed of this, we should be rather proud that we were the emancipators. And yet, none of this, but this is not being taught, Matt.
But what's even more important is that the fact that God creates the individual uniquely. We know that just by understanding enough medical science to know about DNA. Each one of us is unique. Nigel, you weren't a slaveholder. I wasn't a slaveholder. Each one of us has the right to live our lives. We can castigate people of the past, but the law is about for the people of the current moment. And if we constantly live with the grievances of 5, 6, 16 generations ago, how could you possibly move forward? We're going to be completely paralyzed with hate.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the tearing down of statues, the attempt to erase history, is a really, really dangerous path. We shouldn't erase history. We should study history. We should learn from history. We should, chart the progress, the evolution that perhaps mankind has made in all sorts of areas, medical science, you name it. We should chart this, learn about it, and understand it. But Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has today come up with a plan. He's going to form a committee that he appoints, and they're going to examine all of the statues in London, all of the road names in London, all of the squares in London, because he doesn't think they're representative enough of black and ethnic, gay and transgender people. And it must represent modern London. But you can't have a monument to the English Civil War that commemorates diversity. We weren't a diverse nation. It is a ridiculous attempt to try and rewrite history. And I think it's very, very dangerous. It's the kind of thing that Mao did with the Cultural Revolution. It's the kind of thing the Taliban do with blowing up medieval structures. This is the madness that we've got into. And Matt, I've been standing up and fighting against this for the last few days, and I'm going to go on standing up and fighting against this.
We're all following you in America on Twitter. Keep up the fight. I assume that you have both your track shoes and your Spurs on, because we haven't heard the end of Nigel Farage. At least that's our hope and our prayer. Please tell us that you're going to keep up the fight in your country.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Brexit was a massive, extraordinary thing. When I first started that campaign, everybody was against me. And I mean, everybody was against me. Every media organization, every elected politician. But you know what? If you know what's right, and if you have a feel for what good, ordinary, decent people living in your country think, not those living in the bubble of Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, or London. And I know that with this huge cultural battle we've got about our identity, about our history, about how we deal with it, I'm even more certain that I'm in the same space as Middle England on this than I even was on Brexit. And no, I'm not giving up. I'm not going away.
That's awesome. And you know what we're going to do? We're adding to that. We're also getting out of our homes. We're getting back on the road, and we're going to take CPAC everywhere, because the American season that we're entering, this political season, is critically important. And I think we just feel like nothing could be more important than Donald Trump getting 4 more years, not just for the American people, but for freedom lovers everywhere.
Well, when it comes to, I mean, I'll just name one issue now, if I may. We lived through the 60s, 70s, 80s, the Cold War, that great battle against Soviet Russia, and the West came out as the victor, and that was a great thing for everybody. We're going into a new Cold War. It's with China. Much of what they've done is deeply sinister, but here's the problem. They've bribed so many people in our business, media, and political class right across the world that criticism of them is somewhat mute. They've also made us so dependent upon them. I mean, give you an example. 80% of the antibiotics in Britain that are taken are manufactured in China. So they've made us dependent upon them. And to cut the link with communist China, to get them out of our communication systems, to reset the balance in an intelligent and sensible way, will take, I'm back to where I started tonight, it'll take moral courage, all right? And I don't think The Australians are doing their best, but they're relatively small as a country. Boris is flip-flopping all over the place on this. The one world leader, and you may like him or not like him. I mean, you and I do rather like him, but whether you like Donald Trump's style or not, the one thing Trump has got is moral courage. And if we're to stop the world being taken over by the Chinese Communist Party, the Western free world needs to be led by a man with genuine moral courage and conviction. And that man is Donald Trump.
Can't agree with you more, Nigel. As we end this interview, we let you get back to searching a pub that's open. As our two countries are talking about trading more and entering into more agreements, bilateral trade agreements, maybe we can work together, even though we don't at the moment have government positions, to make sure that that agreement does something about this kind of manufacturing chain and how and where things are made, so that both our societies can have security and economic certainty, and both also on social media in these agreements, that we can make sure that these social media companies can't get out of jail when they do things that are terrible, that we can actually take steps to try to just have basic fairness. And I think if you and I, my group and yours could work together on these types of things, and we could develop even stronger relationships between our two countries, I think great things can happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, despite all the great threats that we face, both externally and internally, as we're seeing recently, we just got to keep remembering that ordinary, decent people don't go along with this rubbish. They need leadership, they need direction, and that actually, and this is something else, of course, the protesters won't like, but actually, even though if we go back a few years, the United States and the UK had their difficulties, but we have become, over the last 100 years, when we're together on the same side, the most incredible alliance in the world. There's nothing we can't achieve when we're on the same page. So, Matt, happy to work with you on any of these things.
This is great. Nigel Farage, thank you so much for joining us on CPAC Live. Keep up your Twitter activity on what's going on the streets of London and around the country, and we'll do the same. And you all need to keep watching CPAC Live. We have a great next show for you on Friday, when we'll be joined by Eduardo Bolsonaro of Brazil, who is doing a great job rallying conservatives, where we had CPAC Brazil last year. And we'll also be joined by Dr. Larry Arnn, one of the few sane presidents of an American university, the great Hillsdale. Join us 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for CPAC Live. We'll see you then. Thank you.